Hi everyone, my name's Alison. I'm one of the Android engineers here at Makoto, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about Android 11, as well as some of the features that we expect to form part of that release. So what's new in Android 11? So there are some redesign changes around notifications and the public rollout of bubbles. There are some improvements to the accessibility feature, voice access. There are some privacy enhancements, which is very common amongst most operating system updates. And a few more bits and pieces as well, which we'll cover in the upcoming slides. Now, Google have identified 3 core themes that really underpin Android 11, and those are people, controls, and privacy. So let's jump right in. First, I want to talk about people. So there have been some design changes around notifications. Google have introduced the concept of categorized notifications. So what that means, there are now 3 distinct groups when you pull down from the top of the device. The first group will always be conversations. Now that's right up at the top. It's given the highest priority because Google have identified communication as still the most valued functional area for the majority of their users. Now in this top section, all of your notifications from your various messaging apps, such as WhatsApp, Google Message, Facebook Messenger, and so on, would be grouped together, and it means that a user at a glance can see all of their messages and reply in line if they wanted to. So next up are alerting notifications. So they're generally the ones that we would send from our apps. For example, if you were to send out a notification when a draw is upcoming, or if a jackpot hits a certain threshold, they would form part of the alerting notifications group. And then at the bottom are the silent notifications. So they're the ones that are given the lowest priority, generally ones that users wouldn't necessarily interact so much with. For example, as you can see on the screenshot on the right there, the weather, if there are updates to an app, for example. And the other change around notifications are VIP conversations. So that gives the user the ability to mark a specific conversation as high priority. So it would jump right up to the top and also break through any do not disturb that you have active on the device at that time. So next up we have bubbles. So if you're an Android user and you have Facebook Messenger, you've probably already seen bubbles in action. But the big improvement with Android 11 is that it's now been rolled out, so developers will be able to use the Bubble API. So what is a bubble? It's effectively a floating notification. It sits on top of whichever apps you have open at that time, and it's always visible. So a user can tap that bubble to view an expanded view of their message, as you can see on the right hand side there, and then when they're finished, they can collapse that back down into the bubble state. And it's part of a big drive from Google to improve multitasking for users. And that's actually really good news for us in the apps that we develop. Previously, if a user was using one of our apps and they received a message, they would have to put our app to the background, go into the messaging app, do what they wanted in there, if that's just read the message or reply, and then put that to the background, and then eventually make their way back to our app. And there's a lot of scope in there for a user to perhaps get distracted and not necessarily come back. However, with the use of bubbles, as that sits on the screen as an overlay, all they have to do when they receive a new message through their bubble is tap it, it will open as an overlay, and when they're finished, it will collapse back down and the user's still in our app. So that's great news for us. It means users are going to spend more time in our apps and improve user engagement massively. Now, users can opt out of displaying bubbles. They're not necessarily for everyone, so a user can go into their settings and turn bubbles off. If they were to do that, it would mean that those notifications that would have come through previously as a bubble would just come through as a normal notification, which can be viewed when dragging down from the top of the screen. Now, Google are quite clear on their recommendations of when to use bubbles. They should only be for ongoing conversations. Now, there are still some use cases in our domain. One of the ones I was thinking of was if you offer live chat functionality, for example, where a user can interact with a support agent. Something like that would be really interesting as a bubble, as it would allow the user to still multitask whilst they're waiting for a reply. And it's also offering something that's really custom to Android, and it's getting the most out of the OS, which is something that we should really be striving to do when developing our apps. So next up are controls. So there's a feature called voice access, which Google first introduced in 2018. And it's an accessibility feature. It's there mainly for people who perhaps have motor impairments, so that using their hands as input to the device is challenging. It allows the user to use their voice instead to perform commands. So voice access will generate some on-screen labels that allow the user to trigger commands by saying those labels, which I'll show you a demo of shortly. So there have been some significant improvements to this feature in Android 11 with what Google refer to as the on-device visual cortex. So this is using AI, and it's effectively making the feature a lot smarter. It's context aware and can do a lot more things than previous versions of voice access. So I've got a little demo of this in action, which I'll show you now.
Twitter. Scroll down. 5. Scroll up. 5. Tweet. Hey Twitter! Exclamation mark. I'm creating this tweet hands-free with the help of Google's voice access. Heart eye emoji. Tweet. Scroll up. 5. Go home.
So yes, it's pretty neat functionality. The labels are generated on screen, as you can see there, but the user doesn't necessarily have to use those. For example, the user can say tweet, and voice access can interpret what the user's intent is. So the next control to talk about is native screen recording. So this is now part of Android as standard. It prevents having to use third-party applications to record your screen, which is what we were having to do previously. And it gives the user the option if they want to record audio or if they want to record their screen taps. And just to give you an idea, all of the screen recordings that have been part of the slide pack have been recorded using this native screen recording functionality. Next up is scheduled dark mode. So dark mode first arrived in Android 10, and it allows apps to customize their appearance based on the user's preference for regular or dark mode. And the big improvement in Android 11 is that can now be scheduled. So it allows the user to say, for example, turn on dark mode at a specific time at night and then turn it off in the morning. And that's a really common use case, particularly given the lower ambient light of an evening. Sometimes a bright screen can be quite disruptive, so it's quite a common use case to have dark mode of an evening and then turn it off in the morning. Next up is privacy. So there have been quite a few changes around permissions. First one we'll talk about is one-time permissions. So there's now a new option for users to grant sensitive permissions only once, and that would persist whilst the app is active. So when the app is closed and then reopened again, and a permission is requested, the user would be granted with this dialog again. Now this is really great for a user. It gives them much more granular control over how their data is used and when they share it. So next up we have smart deny permissions. So in Android 10 and in older versions of Android as well, there was the option to deny and don't ask again. Now in Android 11 that has been removed in favour of the OS being a little bit smarter. So if a user were to tap deny multiple times, it's implicit that the user really doesn't want to grant that permission, and they then wouldn't be shown that pop-up again. Now it's really important from an app point of view that we give the user some information in that scenario. So if permissions aren't granted, it would be really best practice to offer the user a deep link option, so a button that you could tap on a pop-up, for example, that takes the user straight into settings, so that if they wanted to grant that permission again, they've just got one tap of a button and it takes them exactly to where they need to go to be able to grant it again. And that's really important, particularly in our domain, where geolocation, for example, is a very important permission that's required in a lot of scenarios. So next up we have auto revoke permissions. So that's brand new to Android 11. And what it means is if an app isn't used for a prolonged period of time, Android will automatically revoke permissions of that app. Now that's again very useful for a user. For example, if they were to install an app, not find it particularly useful, but grant blanket permissions to collect location data in the background, that app will continue doing that until it is removed. Whereas now, if that app is not used, the operating system will be able to revoke those permissions, which is very useful for a user. It can be overridden. You can see on that screenshot on the right hand side there's a little toggle at the bottom. So if the user doesn't want to enable that, they can tap that toggle. So thank you for listening.